The blood-red sunset painted shadows across Ruby Winter's face as she stared down the barrel of her father's old Winchester. The Prescott gang would be here by dawn, and Yancey Cole was the only man foolish enough or perhaps brave enough to ride through Apache territory to warn her. "You need to leave this place," Yancey said, his voice steady despite the 40-mile ride that had nearly killed his horse. Dust caked his worn leather vest, and his dark hair hung in sweaty tendrils beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "They know your father's dead. They're coming for the deed." Ruby lowered the rifle, but kept her distance. 3 months ago, she might have trusted this man with her life. Now she could barely look him in the eye without feeling the sting of betrayal. "I appreciate the warning," she said coldly, "but I can handle myself." Yancey's blue eyes narrowed as he surveyed the small ranch house. The barn needed repairs, the fence was broken in 3 places, and there wasn't another soul for miles. "Ruby, be reasonable. 5 armed men are riding this way. Your father's gold claim won't mean much if you're dead." She turned away, fighting the tremor in her voice. "Why do you care? You made your choice when you rode out with that marshal 3 months ago. You chose the badge over me." "I never chose anything over you," he said, taking a step toward her. "I took that deputy position to build something for us." "Stop." Ruby held up her hand. "It's too late for us." Yancey closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. "Not if we ride now." Ruby felt her resolve weakening as she looked into those familiar eyes that had once promised her the world. But promises in the Arizona territory of 1883 were as fleeting as rain. "My father died defending this land," she said. "I won't abandon it." "Your father would want you alive more than he'd want this patch of dirt," Yancey countered. His calloused hand reached for hers, but she pulled away. "Ruby, listen to me. The Prescotts aren't just coming for the deed. They want revenge for their brother." Ruby's blood ran cold. 3 weeks ago, she'd shot Silas Prescott when he'd tried to force himself on her during a supply run to town. He'd survived, but the bullet in his shoulder had festered. Word had reached her last week that he'd died. "I did what I had to do," she whispered. "I know," Yancey said gently. "And they're coming to do what they think they have to do." The silence between them was filled with the whisper of the desert wind and the distant howl of a coyote. Ruby glanced at the homestead her father had built with his bare hands. The thought of leaving it felt like another death. "We have maybe 6 hours before they get here," Yancey continued. "We can be halfway to Tucson by then." "And then what?" Ruby demanded. "Hide forever? That's not a life." "No," Yancey said firmly. "We get to the territorial judge in Tucson. I've got witnesses who saw what Silas tried to do to you. We make this legal." Ruby hesitated. It sounded too simple, too clean. Nothing in her life had ever worked out that easily. "Why are you really here, Yancey? Last I heard, you were heading to California." A shadow crossed his face. "I never made it past Flagstaff. Couldn't get you out of my mind." He removed his hat, revealing the full intensity of his gaze. "I made a mistake leaving the way I did. Every day since has been punishment enough." Ruby turned away, unable to bear the sincerity in his eyes. She'd spent months hardening her heart against this very moment. "My father's buried under the cottonwood," she said quietly. "I can't just leave him. He's at peace, Ruby. But you won't be if you stay." The practical truth of his words sank in. Her father had always told her that land was only worth what you could build on it. And she couldn't build anything if she was dead. "I need an hour," she finally said, "to gather what's important." Relief flooded Yancey's face. "I'll saddle your mare and keep watch." He started toward the door, then paused. "Pack light. We'll be riding hard." After he left, Ruby moved through the small house with purpose. She took only what couldn't be replaced: her mother's wedding ring, her father's Bible, and the deed to the gold claim hidden in a hollowed-out book. Into a small bag went a change of clothes, dried beef, and the photograph of her parents taken in St. Louis before they'd caught gold fever and headed west. When she stepped outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Yancey had saddled her mare, Penny, and was checking his own horse's hooves for stones. "Your horse looks spent," Ruby observed, noting the exhaustion in the animal's stance. "Thunder will make it to the Ravine Creek crossing," Yancey said. "I've got a friend there who'll lend us fresh mounts." Ruby tied her bag to the saddle and mounted Penny with practiced ease. The familiar motion brought a wave of memories riding these hills with her father, learning the land's secrets, its hiding places. "I still don't know if this is right," she admitted. "Sometimes right isn't clear until you look back on it," Yancey replied, swinging into his saddle with a wince that told Ruby he was hurt somewhere but hiding it. "You're injured." "It's nothing. Took a fall crossing the ravine on my way here." Ruby frowned. "Let me see. Later. We need distance more than doctoring right now." The stubborn set of his jaw told her arguing would be pointless. That much about him hadn't changed. They rode away from a homestead without looking back, taking the narrow trail that wound through the foothills rather than the main road. The moon rose full and bright, illuminating the landscape in silver. They rode in silence for the first hour, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Ruby who finally broke the quiet. "How did you know about the Prescotts coming?" Yancey's face was half hidden in shadow. "I was in Willow Springs when they rode through. Overheard them at the saloon, bragging about what they planned to do to the woman who killed their brother. And you just decided to warn me?" He shot her a sideways glance. "Would you believe me if I said I was already on my way to see you? Had been for days." Ruby studied his profile, trying to read the truth in it. "Why?" "To apologize. To explain." He adjusted his hat. "To see if there was anything left between us worth saving." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. "I waited for you to come back," she said softly. "For weeks, I watched the road."
"I'm sorry, Ruby."
"Truly." His voice cracked. "That badge. I thought it would make me worthy of you. Your father never thought I was good enough." "That wasn't his decision to make." "No, but he wasn't wrong. What did I have to offer you?" "A drifter with nothing but a good horse and a decent name." Ruby remembered the night Yancey had first come to their ranch, looking for work. Her father had hired him reluctantly, but he'd proven himself time and again mending fences, breaking horses, defending the small homestead from would-be claim jumpers. She'd fallen in love with his quiet strength, his unwavering loyalty. Until he'd left. "The marshal offered me a chance," Yancey continued. "Said a man with a badge could make something of himself. Could have a future." He looked at her directly. "Could have a family." The word family hung in the air between them. Once, they'd spoken of children, of building a life together. Dreams that had withered like unwatered seeds. "My father died 2 weeks after you left," Ruby said. "Heart just gave out. The doctor said it was coming for years, but I can't help thinking the loneliness sped it along. I should have been there." "Yes," she agreed simply. "You should have." They fell silent again as the trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Yancey took the lead, his shoulders tense as he scanned the terrain ahead. Ruby found herself studying those shoulders broader than she remembered, carrying more weight. An hour later, they reached a small creek where they stopped to water the horses. Yancey dismounted with a poorly concealed grimace. "Show me," Ruby demanded, sliding from her saddle. After a moment's hesitation, he unbuttoned his vest and lifted his shirt. A deep gash ran along his ribs, crusted with dried blood. "That's not from a fall," Ruby said, her nursing instincts taking over. "That's a knife wound." Yancey didn't meet her eyes. "Had a disagreement with one of the Prescott boys in Willow Springs. He got in a lucky swipe before I laid him out. They've seen you? They know you're coming to warn me." Anger and fear mingled in her voice. He was in no shape to follow, and I didn't exactly announce my plans. He lowered his shirt. But yes, they might figure it out. Ruby dug into her saddlebag for the small medical kit she always carried. Sit down before you fall down. To her surprise, he obeyed without argument. She cleaned the wound with water from the creek and a splash of whiskey from the flask in her kit. Yancey hissed, but didn't pull away as she stitched the gash with steady hands. You've gotten better at this, he observed. Had plenty of practice. Miners from the creek come to me now that Doc Simmons moved to Tucson. She tied off the last stitch. This needs proper cleaning when we reach town. Yes, madam. A hint of the old smile played at his lips, and for a moment, it was as if the months of separation had never happened. Ruby packed away her supplies, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, of the familiar scent of him leather and sage and something uniquely Yancey. She stood quickly. We should keep moving. They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses. As promised, they reached Ravine Creek Crossing before dawn, where Yancey's friend, a grizzled old trapper named Josiah, provided them with fresh mounts and a warning. Riders came through here 2 hours ago, he told them as they transferred their saddles. 5 men, armed and mean-looking. Asked if I'd seen a woman and a man headed for Tucson. Ruby exchanged a worried look with Yancey. What did you tell them? Told 'em I hadn't seen nobody. Josiah spat tobacco juice into the dirt. But they didn't much believe me. Left a man watching the crossing. Had to sneak around him to get to you folks. We appreciate the risk you took, Yancey said, clasping the old man's shoulder. Ain't no risk too great for Yancey Cole, Josiah replied with a gap-toothed grin. Not after you saved my worthless hide from that grizzly 2 winters back. They set off again, this time cutting across country to avoid the main trails. The terrain was rougher, but their fresh horses handled it well. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive, baking the desert landscape. There's a line shack about 3 miles ahead, Yancey said around midday. We can rest there through the worst of the heat, then push on to Tucson after sundown. Ruby nodded, too exhausted to argue. The lack of sleep and constant vigilance were taking their toll. When the small wooden structure came into view, it looked like salvation itself. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, used by cowboys during roundups, but it offered shade and relative safety. Yancey did a quick sweep before allowing Ruby inside, then set about securing the horses in a small lean-to at the back. Ruby sank onto a rough wooden bench, her legs trembling with fatigue. She hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge how frightened she'd been until this moment of relative safety. Here, Yancey said, returning with a canteen. Drink slowly. She took the water gratefully, watching as he moved around the small space, checking sight lines, securing the single window, laying out his rifle within easy reach. The competent movements reminded her of why she'd fallen for him in the first place: his calm in crisis, his ability to make her feel protected without making her feel weak. Try to get some sleep, he suggested. I'll keep watch. You need rest too, she countered. That wound won't heal if you run yourself into the ground. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Still bossing me around, I see. Someone has to. The familiar banter felt dangerous, like stepping onto thin ice. Yancey settled by the window, positioning himself to see the approach without being visible from outside. 1 hour. Then we'd trade places. Ruby stretched out on the narrow cot against the wall, not expecting to sleep, but exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. She woke to Yancey's hand on her shoulder and the golden light of late afternoon slanting through the window. You let me sleep too long, she accused, sitting up. You needed it. He looked even more tired than before, the lines around his eyes deeper. No sign of pursuit. We should reach Tucson by morning if we ride through the night. As they prepared to leave, Ruby found herself watching Yancey, noting the careful way he moved to protect his injured side, the vigilance that never left his eyes. Questions burned in her throat. Why did you really leave the marshal service? She finally asked. You haven't mentioned your badge once. Yancey paused in checking his saddle cinch. Because I don't have it anymore. He straightened slowly. Turned it in 2 months ago. Why? The marshal asked me to do something I couldn't do. His jaw tightened. Wanted me to help evict some homesteaders so the railroad could come through. Families just like yours, working hard to make something from nothing. Ruby studied his face, reading the cost of that decision in the new lines around his mouth. So you quit. I quit, he confirmed. Spent some time drifting doing odd jobs. Thinking about what really matters. His eyes met hers. About who really matters. The raw honesty in his voice made her look away. It was easier to hold on to anger than to risk hope. We should go, she said. They rode out as the sun began its descent, staying off the main trails and keeping to the shadows of the hills. The new horses were strong and sure-footed, eating up the miles. As darkness fell, Ruby found herself riding closer to Yancey, drawn to him despite her reservations. Tell me about your time with the marshal, she said, breaking a long silence. Was it what you hoped? Yancey considered the question. Parts of it. I liked helping people, making a difference. But the politics of it, he shook his head. Law isn't always justice out here. And that bothered you. It did. He glanced at her. Your father was right about one thing. I'm not cut out for taking orders I don't believe in. Ruby remembered her father's assessment of Yancey. Too independent for his own good. She defended him then, arguing that independence was a virtue in the territory. What will you do now? She asked. After Tucson, I mean. The question hung between them. What came after this immediate danger, after their paths had crossed again so unexpectedly? I've got some savings, he said carefully. Enough to make a start somewhere. Maybe find some land to work. He paused. I always did like ranching. The implication was clear, but Ruby wasn't ready to acknowledge it. Instead, she asked, how did you know where to find me? The ranch is pretty isolated. I wrote to your father, Yancey admitted. About a month after I left. Never got an answer, but I didn't really expect one.
His voice softened.
Then last month, I heard about a woman near Silver Creek who was helping miners with medical troubles. Sounded like you. My mother taught me, Ruby said. Before the consumption took her. Said a woman needs skills of her own out here. She was right. Yancey's admiration was evident. You always were the capable one between us. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the night sounds of the desert their only companions. Ruby found herself remembering other nights they'd spent together sitting on the porch of her father's house, pointing out constellations, writing fence lines in the cool darkness when summer heat made daytime work impossible. I missed you, she said, so quietly she wasn't sure he'd hear. But he did. I missed you every day, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. Leaving was the biggest mistake of my life. Before Ruby could respond, Yancey reined his horse to a sudden stop, holding up his hand for silence. She halted beside him, straining to hear what had caught his attention. Then she heard it too, the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple horses moving at speed. Ravines about a quarter-mile ahead, Yancey said in a low voice. We can lose them there. They urged their horses forward, no longer trying for stealth but for speed. The ravine appeared before them, a dark slash in the earth. Without hesitation, Yancey led them down a steep trail that zigzagged to the bottom. The dry creek bed at the bottom was littered with boulders and scrub, making it treacherous in the darkness. They navigated carefully, moving deeper into the ravine, where the walls rose high on either side. There, Yancey pointed to a narrow opening in the rock face. It leads to a box canyon. They won't find us if we can get in there without being seen. The passage was barely wide enough for the horses to pass through single file. Inside, they found themselves in a small canyon ringed by steep walls, with a spring bubbling from the rocks at one end. "How did you know about this place?" Ruby asked as they dismounted. "Tracked a mountain lion here once," Yancey said, leading the horses to the spring. "It's not on any maps I've seen." The walls of the canyon would hide any light, so Yancey risked building a small fire while Ruby tended to the horses. The warmth was welcome as the desert night grew colder. "Do you think they followed us from the lion shack?" Ruby asked, settling beside the fire.
Possibly.
"Or they might have guessed our route." Yancey stared into the flames. "The Prescotts know these lands almost as well as we do." Ruby drew her knees up to her chest. "I keep thinking about my father's grave. Who will tend it now?" "We can go back," Yancey said softly. "When it's safe. When the law has dealt with the Prescotts." "And if the law doesn't deal with them?" "The Prescotts have friends in the territorial government." Yancey's expression hardened. "Then I'll deal with them myself." "No," Ruby said sharply. "I won't have more blood spilled because of me." "Silas Prescott made his choice when he put his hands on you," Yancey reminded her. "You defended yourself. That's not something that needs forgiveness." Ruby stared into the fire, remembering the weight of the pistol in her hand, the shock on Silas's face when she'd pulled the trigger. "I don't regret protecting myself," she said slowly. "But I do regret that it's come to this, running for my life, leaving everything behind." "Not everything," Yancey said, his eyes finding hers across the flames. "Not if you don't want to." The vulnerability in his gaze made her heart ache. Here was the man she'd fallen in love with, direct, honest, unwavering in his feelings. The man who'd left her but had come back when she needed him most. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she admitted. "I don't blame you for that." He poked at the fire. "But I'd like the chance to earn that trust back. However long it takes." Ruby considered his words. The pain of his departure was still there, but alongside it now is something else: the recognition that people make mistakes, that true regret deserves consideration. "One day at a time," she finally said. "That's all I can offer right now." His smile was worth the risk of those words. "One day at a time is more than I hoped for when I rode to your ranch yesterday." They slept in shifts that night, though neither rested well. At first light, they set out again, leaving the safety of the hidden canyon to continue their journey to Tucson. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they skirted the foothills of the Santa Catalina Mountains. Around midday, they reached a vantage point that allowed them to see the desert stretching out below. In the far distance, the buildings of Tucson shimmered in the heat. "We'll be there by nightfall," Yancey said with relief. "If the Prescotts don't catch us first," Ruby added, scanning the landscape behind them. "They won't." His confidence was reassuring. "We've covered our tracks well, and they won't expect us to take this route. It's too difficult for someone who doesn't know it." They continued on, picking their way carefully down the rocky slopes. The horses were tiring, but the promise of safety drove them forward. As they reached flatter ground, Ruby felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Perhaps they would make it after all. Then came the sound they'd been dreading: a rifle shot, echoing across the desert. The bullet kicked up dust several yards to their right. "Ride!" Yancey shouted, spurring his horse. Ruby did the same, leaning low over Penny's neck as they galloped across the open ground. More shots followed, but the distance was too great for accuracy. Still, the message was clear: the Prescotts had found them. A stand of cottonwoods offered temporary cover. They pulled up beneath the trees, breathing hard, horses lathered from the sudden sprint. "For riders," Yancey reported, peering back the way they'd come. "Still a ways off, but they've spotted us." "We can't outrun them on these horses," Ruby said, noting how their mounts were heaving for breath. Yancey nodded grimly. "We make a stand, then." "Here."
No.
He pointed ahead. "There's an old stagecoach station about 2 miles ahead. Adobe walls, good sight lines. Better than being caught in the open." They set off again, pushing their tired horses as much as they dared. The abandoned station came into view just as their pursuers appeared on the horizon behind them, 4 men riding hard, rifles glinting in the sunlight. The station was a simple structure, a single large room with thick adobe walls, a small corral, and a well. Time and weather had damaged the roof, but the walls still stood strong. They secured the horses in what remained of the corral and hurried inside. Only one way in, Yancey noted with satisfaction, checking the ammunition in his pistol. Makes it easier to defend. Ruby positioned herself by one of the narrow windows, her father's Winchester ready. I count 4 of them. Weren't there supposed to be 5 Prescott brothers? Maybe one stayed behind. Yancey didn't sound convinced. Or maybe he's somewhere we can't see him. The riders drew closer, then split up to surround the station. They maintained their distance, clearly assessing the situation. Ruby Winters, a voice called out. We know you're in there. Send yourself out, and your man can ride away. That's Wade Prescott, Yancey murmured. The oldest. You know I can't trust that offer, Ruby called back. A harsh laugh answered her. Trust ain't got nothing to do with it, girl. It's justice we're after. An eye for an eye. Your brother attacked me, Ruby shouted. I defended myself. Any court would say the same. We don't need no court out here. Another voice, younger and hotter with anger. Silas is dead because of you. Yancey caught Ruby's eye and shook his head. There would be no reasoning with grief and vengeance. We can wait you out, Wade called. No food, no water, you'll have to come out eventually. They don't know about the well, Ruby whispered. Yancey nodded. And they don't know the station sits on the main road to Tucson. Army patrols come through here regular as clockwork. He checked his pocket watch. One should be by tomorrow morning, if we can hold out that long. A shot hit the adobe wall, sending a spray of dust into the room. More followed, a steady barrage that seemed designed to wear down their nerves rather than do real damage. They're trying to get us to waste ammunition, Yancey observed. Don't return fire unless you've got a clear shot. The standoff continued through the afternoon. The Prescotts maintained their positions, occasionally firing at the station but making no move to approach. Inside, Ruby and Yancey conserved their ammunition and water, speaking little but drawing comfort from each other's presence. As sunset approached, the shooting stopped. In the sudden quiet, Ruby could hear the Prescotts talking among themselves, though she couldn't make out the words. What are they planning? She wondered aloud. Yancey's expression was grim. Nothing good. Stay alert. Darkness fell swiftly, as it always did in the desert. The moon was waning now, providing less light than the night before. Ruby strained her eyes, trying to make out movements in the gathering shadows. They're going to try to get to the horses, Yancey predicted. Take away our means of escape. Or they might try to set fire to the roof, Ruby suggested. The station's wooden roof beams were old and dry. They took turns watching through the night, but the Prescotts made no move. The silence was almost worse than the shooting, a waiting game designed to fray their nerves. Dawn brought renewed tension. The Prescotts were still there, their campfire visible in the distance. But something had changed. 5 horses, Ruby counted. There were only 4 before. Yancey squinted through the early morning light. The 5th brother must have caught up with them. Or someone else has joined them, Ruby said uneasily. They didn't have to wait long to find out. As the sun cleared the horizon, a lone rider approached the station, a white handkerchief tied to his rifle barrel. That's not a Prescott, Yancey said, recognition and confusion mixing in his voice. That's Marshall Dawson. Ruby glanced at him sharply. Your former boss? Yancey nodded, his expression troubled. What's he doing riding with the Prescotts? They watched as the marshal approached, stopping at a respectful distance from the station. Cole, he called out. I know you're in there. Come out and talk. Yancey hesitated, then called back. Not until I know why you're riding with the men trying to kill us. I'm here to prevent bloodshed, Dawson replied. The Prescotts have a legitimate grievance, but I've convinced them to let the law handle it. Since when is attempted murder a legitimate grievance? Ruby demanded. The woman speaks for herself, Dawson noted. Miss Winters, I'm here to take you into custody for the killing of Silas Prescott. You'll stand trial in Tucson as the law requires. And if we refuse? Yancey called. Then I can't stop what happens next. The marshal's voice hardened. The Prescotts have legal authority to make a citizen's arrest for murder. I'm offering you a safer alternative. Ruby and Yancey exchanged looks. I don't trust him, Ruby whispered. Neither do I, Yancey agreed. This is the same man who wanted to evict families for the railroad. His law bends with the political winds. What do? Yancey thought for a moment. We stall. The Army patrol should be coming through within hours. Your answer, Cole? Dawson called impatiently. We need time to consider, Yancey responded. And proof that your offer is genuine. What proof would satisfy you? The Prescotts right away. All of them. You stay to escort us to Tucson. There was a long pause, then the sound of heated discussion from the Prescott camp. Finally, Dawson called back. They'll withdraw to the ridge line as a show of good faith. But they won't leave entirely until you've surrendered yourself, Miss Winters. It wasn't ideal, but it would give them more options than being surrounded. Agreed, Yancey called. They watched as 4 riders reluctantly withdrew to the distant ridge, leaving Dawson alone near the station. He's up to something, Ruby murmured. Undoubtedly, Yancey agreed. But what? They got their answer an hour later, when smoke began to seep through the damaged roof. While they'd been focused on Dawson and the retreating Prescotts, someone had circled around to the back of the station. Fire! Ruby cried, smelling the burning pinyon wood. Yancey rushed to the roof beams, using his hat to beat at the flames, but they were spreading quickly. Smoke filled the small space, making it hard to breathe. We have to get out, he coughed, grabbing Ruby's arm. Cover me. They burst from the station door, Ruby firing the Winchester to keep Dawson at bay while Yancey ran for the horses. The marshal dove for cover, returning fire that kicked up dust at Ruby's feet. Yancey reached the corral, quickly untying the horses. As he led them back toward Ruby, a shot rang out from the ridge. His body jerked, but he kept moving, determination in every line of his face. Yancey, Ruby cried, seeing the blood spreading across his shirt. I'm all right, he gasped, reaching her side. Mount up. Now. They swung into their saddles as more shots came from the ridge. The Prescotts were riding hard down the slope, abandoning all pretense of the agreement. Dawson was shouting something, but his words were lost in the gunfire. Ruby and Yancey spurred their horses away from the burning station, heading directly for Tucson. The road was exposed, but it was their only chance speed over stealth now that they'd been discovered. You're hit, Ruby said, seeing how Yancey listed in his saddle. Keep riding, he insisted through gritted teeth. Don't stop for anything. They pushed their exhausted horses to their limits, the sound of pursuit driving them forward. Ruby glanced back to see all 5 riders closing the distance, spread out across the road to cut off any attempt to change direction. We're not going to outrun them, she realized aloud. Yancey didn't respond, and Ruby saw with horror that he was barely staying in the saddle. Blood soaked his side where the bullet had struck. Yancey, she called, reaching across to steady him. Stay with me. His eyes found hers, clouded with pain, but still determined. Always, he promised. The road ahead curved around a rocky outcropping. As they rounded it, Ruby's heart leaped with hope. A dust cloud in the distance marked the approach of riders from the direction of Tucson. The patrol, Yancey gasped, seeing it too. If we can reach them. They drove their horses forward with renewed purpose. Behind them, The Prescotts and Dawson had also spotted the approaching riders and were slowing their pursuit, uncertainty evident in their movements. The distance closed agonizingly slowly. Ruby could now make out the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers, a dozen of them riding in formation. She waved desperately and saw the patrol leader signal his men to increase their pace. The Prescotts pulled up, clearly unwilling to confront the U.S. Army. Only Dawson continued forward, his face set in grim lines. As the cavalry patrol reached them, Ruby's relief turned to alarm as Yancey slumped forward in his saddle. She caught him before he could fall, calling desperately for help. "This man needs a doctor," she told the patrol leader, a young lieutenant with concern in his eyes. "What happened here?" the lieutenant demanded, even as two of his men helped ease Yancey from his horse. "These men attacked us," Ruby explained quickly, pointing to the retreating Prescotts. "And that Marshal Dawson, he's working with them." Dawson had stopped a short distance away, clearly calculating his options as several soldiers trained their rifles on him. "Marshal Dawson?" The lieutenant sounded surprised. "What's your business here, sir?" "I'm pursuing a murder suspect," Dawson said smoothly. "That woman killed a man in Silver Creek." "In self-defense," Ruby countered.
He attacked me.
"I have witnesses in Tucson who can verify it." The lieutenant looked between them, then made a decision. "We'll sort this out in Tucson. My men will escort all of you to the territorial courthouse." He gestured to Dawson. "You'll surrender your weapons for now, Marshal." Dawson hesitated, then slowly handed over his pistol, his expression unreadable. Ruby paid little attention to this exchange, her focus entirely on Yancey. He was conscious but pale, blood continuing to seep through his shirt despite the field dressing a soldier had applied. "Hold on," she whispered, clasping his hand. "Just hold on." The journey to Tucson was the longest of Ruby's life, despite the increased pace the patrol set. Yancey grew weaker by the mile, his normally sun-bronzed face now ashen. The lieutenant sent a rider ahead to alert the town doctor, a small mercy for which Ruby was profoundly grateful. When they finally reached Tucson, the doctor was waiting. Yancey was carried into his office while Ruby gave a brief statement to the territorial judge, a stern man named Hollister, who listened carefully to her account of Silas Prescott's attack and the subsequent pursuit. "Marshal Dawson's behavior is troubling," Judge Hollister acknowledged. "I've heard rumors of his connections to certain business interests, but this goes beyond corruption, if what you say is true." "Every word is true, Your Honor," Ruby affirmed. "And there are witnesses in town who saw what Silas tried to do to me." "I'll hear from them as well," the judge promised. "And I'll send deputies to bring in the Prescott brothers for questioning. In the meantime, consider yourself under the court's protection." Ruby thanked him and hurried to the doctor's office, her heart in her throat. The waiting room was empty except for a young assistant who directed her to a back room where Yancey lay on a surgical table, the doctor working over him. "How is he?" she asked anxiously. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes, glanced up. "The bullet missed his vital organs, but he's lost a lot of blood. He'll need careful nursing and complete rest." "I'm a nurse," Ruby said. "Or near enough." The doctor nodded, seeming to recognize something in her expression. "Then you understand the gravity of his condition. He's young and strong, which works in his favor, but infection is always the greatest danger." "I understand." Ruby moved to Yancey's side, taking his hand in hers. His eyes fluttered open at her touch. "Ruby," he whispered, "are you safe?" "Yes," she assured him, throat tight with emotion. "We made it to Tucson. The judge is looking into everything." Relief washed over his features. "Good." His eyes began to close again, exhaustion claiming him. "Rest now," she said softly. "I'll be here when you wake." The next 3 days passed in a blur of anxiety and hope. Ruby rarely left Yancey's side, watching for signs of infection, changing bandages, coaxing him to take broth where he was conscious enough to swallow. The doctor offered her a cot in the same room, recognizing that she wouldn't be persuaded to leave. On the second day, Judge Hollister visited, bringing news that warrants had been issued for the Prescott brothers on charges of attempted murder. Marshall Dawson was in custody, facing charges of conspiracy and abuse of office. "Your witnesses came forward readily," the judge told her. The storekeeper's wife was particularly adamant about what she saw Silas Prescott try to do to you. "No one in this town will fault you for defending yourself." Relief washed over Ruby. "Thank you, Your Honor." "There's more," the judge added. "We found correspondence in Dawson's office linking him to land speculators who've been trying to acquire your father's gold claim. It seems they believe the claim is worth considerably more than anyone has let on." Ruby thought of the small pouch of gold dust her father had occasionally brought home, insisting the vein was modest but steady. "Is it true? Is the claim valuable?" According to the territorial assayer, yes. The samples found in Dawson's possession indicate a rich vein. Not a bonanza, but substantial enough to make it worth killing for, apparently. The news should have been exciting, but Ruby found she cared little for gold with Yancey fighting for his life nearby. "What happens to the claim now?" "It remains yours, as your father's heir," Judge Hollister assured her. "What you do with it is your decision." After he left, Ruby sat by Yancey's bedside, thinking about the claim, about her father's dreams for it, about her own uncertain future. When Yancey stirred, opening his eyes with more clarity than he'd shown since arriving in Tucson, she felt a surge of hope. "Welcome back," she said softly. "How long?" he asked, his voice hoarse. 3 days. She helped him take a sip of water. "The fever broke last night." He studied her face, noting the exhaustion written there. "You've been here the whole time." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "I couldn't leave." A weak smile touched his lips. "Stubborn as always." "Look who's talking." She adjusted his blanket, needing something to do with her hands. "The doctor says you're going to recover, but it will take time." "Time I have, thanks to you." His hand sought hers, his grip stronger than she expected. "Did I dream it, or did you say something about the judge investigating Dawson?" "You didn't dream it." She explained what the judge had discovered about the marshal's corruption and the true value of her father's claim. Yancey absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful. "Your father always said that claim would provide for your future. Seems he was right." "Maybe." Ruby hesitated, then continued. "The judge says I can sell it for a good price. Enough to start fresh somewhere. Is that what you want? To leave?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to voice fully. "I don't know," she admitted. "For so long, that land was everything my father's dream, my heritage, my responsibility.
But now."
"Now," he prompted gently when she trailed off. "Now I'm not sure land is what matters most." Her eyes met his, vulnerable and honest. "These past days, watching you fight to stay alive, it clarified things for me." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ruby, let me finish," she said. "When you left before, I was so angry. I thought you'd chosen ambition over love. But when you came back to warn me, when you risked everything..." She took a deep breath. "I realized that people can make mistakes, even with the best intentions. And sometimes they deserve a second chance." Hope transformed his face. "Are you offering me one?" "I'm saying I want to," she answered carefully. "But I need to know what you want, Yancey. Not just for now, but for the future." He tightened his grip on her hand. "What I want hasn't changed since the day I met you. I want a life with you, Ruby Winters. A home, a family, all of it." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I thought I needed that badge to be worthy of you, but I was wrong. What I needed was to be the kind of man who would ride through Apache territory to warn the woman he loves, even if she might turn him away." Tears pricked at Ruby's eyes. "You are that man." And you're the woman who stayed by my side when most would have given up. His eyes searched hers. So, I'll ask you again, what do you want, Ruby? The answer came with surprising clarity. I want to stop running from the past. I want to build something that's ours, not just my father's legacy or your quest to prove yourself. She leaned closer. I want us, Yancey. Whatever that looks like, wherever it takes us. The smile that spread across his face was worth every mile they'd traveled, every danger they'd faced. I can work with that. 2 months later, they stood together on a hilltop overlooking a small valley where a creek wound through fertile grassland. The property was 30 miles from Tucson, far enough for privacy, but close enough for convenience. The sale of Ruby's father's gold claim had provided more than enough to purchase it and build the house now taking shape below. What do you think? Yancey asked, his arm around her waist. He'd recovered fully from his wound, though a new scar joined the collection that mapped his life's adventures on his skin. I think it's perfect, Ruby replied, leaning into him. Room for cattle on the grassland, crops near the creek. Even a spot for that orchard you keep talking about. Apple trees, he affirmed. In 10 years, we'll have the best apples in the territory. 10 years, she echoed, enjoying the sound of a future measured in decades rather than days. Ambitious. I prefer to think of it as optimistic. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Speaking of the future. Ruby raised an eyebrow, seeing the sudden nervousness in his expression. Yes. I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. I should probably make a grand speech, but the truth is simple. I love you, Ruby Winters. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me? Ruby looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, the man who had come back for her when she needed him most, who had fought beside her, who had never stopped loving her even when she'd pushed him away. Yes, she said, her heart full. Yes, I will. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future. When they finally broke apart, Ruby rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Your father would be proud of you, Yancey said softly. You honored his memory, protected his legacy, and now you're building something new from what he left you. He would have come to like you eventually, Ruby replied with a small smile. Once he saw how happy you make me. They stood together as the sun began to set, painting the valley in gold and amber. Ruby thought about the journey that had brought them here, the danger, the loss, the second chances, and felt a profound sense of peace. You know, she said thoughtfully, when you showed up at my door that day and I said it was too late for us, and I said not if we ride now, Yancey finished. I never imagined now would last this long. She looked up at him, love written plainly on her face. Or that the ride would bring us here. The best journeys are the ones you don't see coming, he replied, pulling her close again. And this one's just beginning. As twilight settled over their new home, Ruby and Yancey walked hand in hand down the hill toward the future they would build together, a future that had seemed impossible just months before, now stretching before them, filled with promise and hope. The land beneath their feet was theirs, the legacy they would create together already taking root. And if their journey had taught them anything, it was that love, like the untamed West itself, rewarded those brave enough to ride toward it, no matter how impossible the odds might seem.